Hey there, and welcome back to Stand By for Adventure. My name is John Lighthouser, and I am here to talk about, this topic right here that's on my piece of paper. And today I'm going to go over advice for new players. So if you are new to Dungeons and Dragons as a player, if you, most likely, if you have never DM'd before, never played any role playing game before, this is for you. I couch this all in Dungeons and Dragons, but it really applies to all role playing games, and I think all of these lessons apply to all role playing games, or all of these tips that I'll be giving. I have about 14 of them, and I may come up with some more as we're talking, so I'm going to try and go quickly. I don't want this to take forever, so let's just jump in. This is advice for new players of role playing games. You're ready to go, right? You want to play. What does that mean? How can you be a good player? How can you be the best player for yourself and especially for the other people at the table, whether they are players or the game master? Um, First off, be prepared. That's absolutely number one. Have your character. If it's on a piece of paper, don't forget your piece of paper. Bring some pencils or pens, dry erase markers if that's what you use. Bring dice, bring everything that you need to play the game. Because just because it's a game doesn't mean that you have zero responsibilities. Unless you have a GM who collects all your characters at the end of the game, puts them in a box, and they always have them. Which I have done in the past, absolutely. And it is a fine idea. That was, of course, back before so many things were online. Now it's not that big of a concern if somebody forgets their character. All that means is they need to turn their phone on and go to D&D Beyond or go to Roll20.net or whatever other service they use for online characters. So be prepared. Have your dice, have your pencils, have your character. Bring snacks, that sort of thing. Whatever your group has decided on, be prepared. That's it. That's the first thing. In addition to all of that, if you're new, please take the time to read through what you've chosen for your character's race, lineage, background, whatever it is. Your character's lineage, I guess is what they're calling it now. Read through the class, at least up to the level that you're at and the abilities that your character has. If you're, playing a thief, better yet, if you're playing a fighter and you're third level and you're in combat and you're not sure if you're going to be able to stand up the next round because your hit points are so low, you should know that you have the second wind ability and if you've used it or not. So just be familiar with what your character is actually capable of, because some of the changes that they've made over the years in D&D have meant instead of characters being really pretty blank slates from one level to the next, and really the only thing that changes is if like how well you fight and how many hit points you have, and then other than that it was really just, do you have a cool magic item to increase your armor class, or to give you a flaming weapon, or to make it so you can fly? And that stuff still exists, but that is not the only thing in the game that affects what your character is capable of doing. So read through your class, read through your feats if you have any feats. At low levels it's only probably going to be one. Make sure you know what you're actually good at. If you're a rogue, you're probably pretty dexterous. If you're a fighter, you are possibly very dexterous, probably very strong, probably have a good constitution. So when things come up in game, oh, my rogue, who's got an 11 constitution, probably doesn't want to be the guy in the front of the fight, because I'm just not going to have as many hit points as, Jocko the Barbarian, who has twice what I have at first level. So just be aware of that. And if you're a spellcaster, know what your spell list is. And if you don't know all of the spells, which is absolutely forgivable, there are a lot, at least read through to know the spells that you have memorized or you have marked on your character sheet that you can use for this game, because it will vastly speed things up in the middle of combat or in the middle of a negotiation, anything like that. So if you have a spell that you can use to influence whatever's happening in the game, you at least have an idea of what it is before you refer back to the book, and you can say to the GM, hey, I think I'm going to use enhance ability to give Lucy a bonus on her charisma checks because she's the one trying to talk to these people and get us what we want, right? So you know what your spells do. You will also want to read through probably all the spells your class is capable of casting to see if there's something there that you're just like, holy crap, this is cool. I want to use this spell. And in a lot of cases in D&D, people sort of hone in on a handful of super useful spells that are awesome. They are fantastic. Things like Spirit Guardians for a cleric, things like Spiritual Weapons for a cleric, things like Fireball or Lightning Bolt for a wizard. Those are the go-tos. Those are the spells that people always know. I know this is going to work. It's going to be good. But you might find something that you love. You might be playing a druid and want to play Heat Metal, which can be an absolutely fantastic spell. It's a little less generally useful, but it has very specific uses that are awesome. So read through your spells. Get to know what your character is capable of. If you have a familiar, get familiar with what your familiar can do. Acquaint yourself with what your familiar can do. So that's all in the be prepared realm of things, right? Just know your character, know what you can do. You're going to have to learn enough stuff anyway that knowing your character first is going to help you so much so that you don't have to worry about researching your character mid-game, and instead you can worry about rolling the dice and making good choices with your character and what they're capable of doing. Second off, pay attention. Please, I beg of you in the name of, or from all game masters ever, everywhere, please don't sit at the table and read comic books or read gaming books or read any book or look at your phone, post on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or Instagram. I mean, some of it is fine, right? Like, my friends and I, we will often take a picture of the game and post something, just real quick, like, oh, gaming with friends, blah, 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 you know, we're all in a group, this should be an easy fight with the dragon, that sort of thing. That's fine, but don't be on your phone. Don't be fully immersed in something else while you're at the table. If you've watched Critical Role, he has incredible players. I don't care. Matt Mercer can be replaced by any other GM of equal skill level. Those players are what make Critical Role so good because they are engaged, they are paying attention, they take a ton of notes, some of them, and they're there. They know their characters, they know what they're capable of doing, they know what their spells do, and because of that, the game flows that much more easily. So if you are trying to recreate that experience that you see on Critical Role or on any number of other streams, that's what you want to mimic. You want to mimic being a good player like Marisha, like I can't think of anybody's name, Liam, like everybody. They all do really incredibly good work as players. I would love to have them for players. Pay attention, also not just to the GM, but to the other players. That's the other thing that's really great about watching Critical Role is you can tell when the players sit back and back off because somebody else has the spotlight and they're doing their own thing. So when Sam is sneaking around as Scanlan or doing something ridiculous as Scanlan, and the other players aren't involved, they just let him go and do what he's going to do. And that's how it should be, because you as the player know it's going to come back around to you. Just the fact that Sam, in this case, is the main character right at this moment doesn't mean you're never going to be again. And you can handle sitting there for 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes. Well, hopefully not 30 minutes, but 5, 10, 15 minutes is pretty reasonable to have the GM spotlight on one character. And during that time, pay attention, because what Sam is doing could come back to be important for the rest of you, and you may want to know what happened, even if it's just on a personal level, your character doesn't know, right? Pay attention to the players, the other GMs. Take notes, I said that. Very important, actually. For some games, notes are an absolute necessity, especially if you're playing in a game that the GM is making things up as opposed to running out of like a pre-written adventure, because in a pre-written adventure everything will be in the book and the GM can refer back to it, or maybe even you could refer back to it. But if things are made up out of whole cloth by the GM at the gaming table, you will want to have those notes not just for yourself, but also to help back up the GM, because they have a lot of things that they're handling at the same time as making up the world that you're interacting with. Notes are always useful. You will be very thankful when somebody brings up a name and you go, wait a minute, I recognize that name. And you can look back in your notes and go, that's the same last name as the thief we killed in the first session we played in that was trying to assassinate Bill's character. I always say Bill. Bill's character. I don't even know any Bills. Why is that significant? Why is that name showing up again? But you'll have that. You'll have those notes. And also the GM can then say to you, oh, no, completely unrelated name. Please don't make that connection. That's a red herring. Or not. Maybe they want you to go with that. But take notes. It's a good idea. I talked a second ago about GM spotlight. So if the GM is paying attention to one player or a couple of players, a handful of players at the table, sit back, pay attention. That's fine. But on the flip side, when you are the player, so if you are in the example I gave before, if you're Sam, don't monopolize the GM's time. Let the scene play out the way it feels like it's going to play out, and don't make it be longer than it needs to be. There is absolutely something to be said for pacing in games, in tabletop role-playing games, that isn't discussed very often. And it's important to be able to move from one encounter, one event to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, in a way that feels natural and unforced, but also doesn't feel like, why are we spending so much time talking to this random street urchin who we don't have anything else to learn from? They told us where we need to go. Why is Eddie still talking to them? Does it have to happen right now? Like, it doesn't. It doesn't. You should not monopolize time. Don't be weird about it. And just pay attention. So if it's you and the GM talking for a while, if you can wrap things up, you want to wrap things up. Because otherwise, you wouldn't like it if somebody did that to you, right? I'm sitting here at the table, I want to play, and you've been talking to the DM for 25 minutes. Come on, we only get to game for 3, 4 hours a night, or whenever you get together. So just be careful about that. Give characters a chance to contribute when you are the center of attention. Maybe somebody else wants to come over and interact. Be open to that, especially if it feels very natural. Like, oh, yep, they were just over there, and I was talking to this guy, and now they come over to talk to us. So just be open to it. This is another big one, and this is challenging for new players unless there's somebody at the table who has been a gamer and has played role-playing games before, and that is, if no one else is doing it, take the lead. And I don't mean become the leader of your group of characters or players. What I mean is the GM has set up your situation, told you everything about what's happening, and stops, clearly waiting for someone else at the table to speak, to react, to do something, and this is what happens. Blah, blah, blah. And that's what you see. And nobody talks. Nothing happens. Personally, it drives me absolutely... I understand taking a moment to think, like, okay, what do we want to do? But even if that's the case, somebody should say after even a couple of seconds, all right, so what do we want to do? That's all it takes. Somebody has to speak up to start that conversation. If you have an idea, offer that up. And everybody else will shoot it down. That's fine. But maybe it'll work. But just start that conversation. Don't leave the GM hanging. Don't make the GM feel like, okay, I didn't tell them enough. They don't know what to do. I need to do something else. I don't have anything else to give them. I've told them everything I need. Like, it just causes this logjam of thoughts in your GM's brain. And all you need to do is say, okay, what do we want to do, everybody? And that'll get people talking. Please do that. I pray that you do that. And it's really pretty simple. Like I said, what do we want to do? That's all you got to say. When you're playing at the table, and this is especially good for new players, again, if you aren't comfortable or don't know how you want to not play the character, if you want to speak in character, if you don't know how to do that, or you don't know what to do, how to make that work, just experiment. Like, if you want to, and I said this in the GM advice video that I put up, the GM shouldn't force you to play in character. You need to kind of find where you're most comfortable playing the game. And that might be saying something along the lines of, I go up to the bartender, order myself an ale, and go back to the table. That's fine. And the GM should be fine with that, unless the GM wants to interject something with the bartender, like, oh, okay, you go up to the bar and the bartender says, I've seen you in here a few times before, and I know you and your friends have been taking care of some business for One-Eyed Pete over there. Do you think I could talk to you about something? And then it becomes a different encounter, right? Then your character, or you, need to react to the bartender in this case. And you can say, like, play with how you respond. Do you just say, okay, I say, I tell them, yeah, we're available to do that. Or do you say, oh, yeah, as a matter of fact, we are for hire. We do freelance work. We work as mercenaries, whatever it is. Why don't you come over and talk to us when you get a chance? Or just whatever. Play with it. Just play with how you want to respond. As I said in the other video, in the DM tips video, and if you're a player, I recommend checking that one out too. Just be open to the fact that you're sitting at a table with your friends. They're not really judging you any more than usual, and you should be comfortable with that. So don't worry about looking like a fool, or because you're not going to look like a fool. You're all sitting around a table playing a game, and they all expect people to talk in character because you're not playing you. But just know you're all sitting there to have a good time, and if you don't want to talk in character, you don't have to. But if you do want to, go for it. Or if you want to take some other tack with it, do that. nobody's going to give you a hard time. And eventually you will find the place that you are most comfortable role playing or playing your character. And it just happens over time. You'll get far more comfortable with it, and it won't seem unusual at all. So don't worry about it. Just kind of play around a little bit. Um, when you come up with your character, make sure to tell the GM and any other player characters in the game that it matters to what your character is about. If you have a fantastic, awesome background that you came up with your character, even if it's 3 sentences long, it could still be super awesome and cool. Or if it's 10 pages long. If you don't tell anyone that your family was killed by a rabid pack of owl bears, and you've sworn to track down and kill every last owl bear in existence, they are not going to have a clue why you care that you all just saw an owl bear over the next hill and your character goes running off. They're not going to have any idea what you're up to. So let everybody know when it's appropriate that there is something more going on. Again, I'll draw an example. There are plenty of examples from Critical Role, but using Sam and his character from the second campaign, Not the Brave. Spoilers for the second campaign, which is years old at this point. But Not the Brave, I guess I won't give everything away, is not actually a goblin. And Sam holds that back for 10, 20, 30 episodes, something like that. And then it's revealed what happened to Not, and that she's looking for a way to return back to what is normal for her. And it's awesome. It was very super cool and a neat thing to do for a character. But even though he let it sit for a long time, he did eventually speak up and say, okay, here's the deal. I'm married, I have a son, I'm a mother, my husband and child I think are still alive, I would like to make sure they're safe, I would like to get back to being a normal person again. That's what I'm looking for, and that's why I've been pushing Caleb to learn as much about magic as possible, is because I want him to fix me, basically. Fantastic. Absolutely great idea. It ties the group together a little bit more closely. It gives his character a motivation to continue adventuring with these people, and it was just very, very cool. So, when you come up with a background, please make sure the points that you need other people to know, that they know them. And that they have that information so that when you start talking about something, they can react in a way that says, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. Your character is interested in this because of X, Y, and Z in your background. And if none of the other players get to know, at least tell the GM, because the GM can then bring some aspects of your background in, and then maybe you will have to explain it to the rest of the player characters, or the rest of the player characters and the rest of the players as to what is going on with your character and their backstory. Let's see here. What is my note here? If you're not really into the if you're not super into the play acting part of role playing, and you are more interested in the gaming aspect, the rolling dice and the special abilities and all the cool weapons and special effects and cool things you can do, that's fine. But you don't have a super involved background for your character, that's also fine. Maybe you like to just, I'm going to write up a fighter, I want him to be I don't know what's a good, not the arcane trickster, what's the Eldritch Knight. So he knows a little bit about magic. He's going to go into, like, that's what I want to play as a character. I don't have a background for him. He was in the guard and now he's out, and that's all I know. That's fine. But just because you've chosen to go that route and somebody else has chosen to come up with a background that has a fair number of details to it, and the GM is riffing on that, right, and incorporating it into the story, you should still contribute to that story in some way. Be there as a friend, confidant, sounding board for the character who's the focus of that part of the story. You don't just want to sit back when when the combat isn't happening, right, and just be, none of this interests me. You're not doing anybody else at the table any good. You're not doing any good at all, and just engage, stay involved, and you will develop, or your character will develop some kind of personality, and you might find it's actually really cool because all of a sudden your character now, you feel like, is closer to another character just because you were involved in something to do with their background. And when they run off to go do something, maybe they'll say, hey, you know about this, I don't want them involved, can you come help me? And then you're off on your own little adventure with just the two of you again. Don't want to steal too much time away from everybody else, but that's the sort of thing that can happen, and all that comes out of is you contributing to somebody else's story, even if you don't care about the story aspect for your character. And you will eventually care about the story aspect for your character because it's just natural to do. Play your character. And this is sort of an interesting side note to that, is also play your character's stats. So when you look at your stats, like a 10 strength or a 15 wisdom or an 8 constitution, think about what those numbers mean in game. Is your big bulky fighter, or is your fighter with an 18 strength super buff? Or is he or she, or they, more like wiry, tough, like just made of wood and cords, right? What do you look like? Somebody with like that 8 constitution I mentioned, maybe they're a little chubby, or maybe they're a little skinny, or maybe they have a constant cough, or something else that is just an indicator of the fact that they do not have the best constitution in the world. They are not the healthiest, hardiest person in the world. Somebody who has low wisdom may be very absent-minded. That's kind of how I define wisdom, and I think they define it in the game, is it's about your awareness of your surroundings. And so if you have a low wisdom, not only do you not have very good common sense, you also just don't notice things. Like, it just doesn't matter. Like, whatever, there's stuff around, I don't care. If it's threatening me, then I care. But that's one way to go. So think about your stats. You know, is your low constitution, or is your low charisma or high charisma because you're particularly good looking or not good looking? Is it because you're covered in really poorly executed tattoos, but you're actually kind of a nice person? People just read you wrong. Is a bad stat due to some curse? It doesn't have to actually be from that, but you can define it as that, right? You can talk to your GM and say, hey, my character has like a 6 strength. I want that to be like I had a debilitating disease, or I was cursed by a god. Sure, great, sounds fine. And even if you got healed at some point, maybe your stat just goes up to a 10, just average. It's not game breaking in any way. But think about what your stats say about your character, and maybe that's a little advanced. I don't know if people really think about that. They come up with their character and then they just go with it, right? Like, I'm a big tough guy and I don't care about the stats I suck at. even though they have an effect on the game. What I care about is what I'm good at. Well, think about what you're not good at too, and what that says about your character, and how that can make your character that much more interesting. Um, uh, when you're at the table, don't slow things down. Try to stay on top of whose turn it is, what's going on in the game. This also has to do with pay attention, which we mentioned earlier. If your turn is coming up and it always comes up after the person next to you's turn, then be prepared. Be checking out, if you have a battle map, check out the battle map, see what's going on, and check through your notes about what you can do. And so when it goes from their turn to your turn, you know exactly what you want to do, or at least you have a question about one of two things you want to do, and you can figure that out either with the other players or with the GM, or just when the next person or the person before you, when their turn ends, you can look at the map and say, okay, this is where things are, I'm going to do this. If you don't, or if it takes you 5, 10, 15 minutes to figure out what you're going to do every time it comes around to your turn, people aren't going to put up with that for very long. And that is also why you will see some GMs, after a pretty short period of time, will say, if you don't do anything, you're going to lose your action. And that's not to punish you. That's so it doesn't punish everybody else at the table for your indecision or lack of knowledge or inattentiveness. They should not have to wait for you. It's like showing up late to a meeting. If there's 10 people in a meeting and you're 5 minutes late, you've wasted 50 minutes of time. And that's basically what you're doing at a gaming table. You've got your turn. It's coming up. It always comes up after the person who was before you last time. So now it's your turn. Be ready to do something. It's just very polite. You will appreciate other players doing that, and they will appreciate you doing that. The only player that I have a lot of forgiveness for, obviously, are very, very new players. But if you are stuck in analysis paralysis, ask your friend, ask the GM, and just say, listen, I just don't know what to do. And within a millisecond, somebody will say, you want to sneak up behind them and stab them in the back. And at least that's an answer, right? Even if it's not exactly what you want to do, sure, I'll do that. Because maybe they see something you don't know, and you can just take care of that for them. You just, all right, I'm going to move up, I'm going to stab them, and then that opens it up for somebody else to go, and then the turn moves along. Speeding the game along will make everything so much more fun, because there's more action going on, there's more role-playing, there's more interaction going on, there's more story happening, so you actually get to play more. You're at the table for whatever, 2, 3, 4 hours. If everybody takes 5 minutes on their turn and you can cut that down to 2 minutes on their turn, that's a huge increase in the amount of time you actually get to play and do things in the game. The next thing I had was make sure you know your initiative order. I've already covered that. And the last thing I'll say is, at least for this video, because that was a lot of different things, take some lessons from improv. D&D, any role-playing game, absolutely benefits from being able to think on your feet quickly, being able to come up with ideas quickly, being able to act out of the blue and react to whatever's going on, the conversations that are happening. You'll get a character in your head, and from then on, you're just improving what they're saying when somebody talks to you, because that's what you're doing. You're playing a character, and there's no script. So take a look at improv. Remember the key rule of improv, which is yes and I'm sure you've heard this before. So when somebody says something, you take that as fact. You take that as, yep, they just told me this, and then you want to add something to it, even if it's something tiny, or uh, or just go along with it, right? Like maybe one of the other players comes up. I'm sorry, I'm making up all these examples off of my head, so off the top of my head, so it takes me a second to think of them. If you have another player who sits down at the table and says to you, um, you've established some previous history about their character's family being kidnapped, and they're looking for them. When they say something like, hey, I need to find out some more information about this region of the country, and your character is from that region or knows something about it or has a skill that might allow them to find out more, um, tell that to the GM and say, hey, I know that region. Can I make a check to see what I know and if I know the name of the person they're talking about? And then that allows you to get involved with their story, but it also adds to their story at the same time. And the GM then can also add to the story and get you both involved in something that previously only would have involved the other character. So think about that as people toss ideas your way or mention things about their character. Think about how you can kind of take that information and add to it in some way. And maybe early on it's just as easy as saying something like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. I'm going to have to remember that because maybe you don't have anything right now that you can help with, but you will down the road. And maybe you come back in a session or two or three and say, I found out some more about X, regarding your kidnapped family, and I think they're associated with this lord who lives in that region. Whatever. Like, talk to your GM, work some things out, and just be able to. Don't just take what somebody says and be a flat wall. Do something with it, and look up information about improv. If you don't like improv, like going to see improv and things like that, even so, there are fantastic lessons in improv and acting to bring to the tabletop that will just make the game that much more enjoyable for everyone. Those are my 10 to 15 tips for beginning players. I'll run through them again really quickly right now. Be prepared, have all your stuff ready. Read through your race, class, abilities, feats, spells. If you have a familiar, acquaint yourself with them. Just get to know everything you can about your character because it'll make it that much easier. Pay attention to what the GM is doing. Pay attention to the other players. Please, please, please put away your books and phones and anything else that distracts you. Take notes. Be an active participant. Don't monopolize the GM's time, or the game time is really what I should say. Give others a chance to contribute. Take the lead if no one else does. Very, very important. And that can change from round to round. Somebody else might speak up when the GM finishes saying something and you aren't the first person. That's great. If you're new to the playing in character or you are uncomfortable with playing in character, still experiment with it and try. Try doing different things when you're talking in character and interacting in character, because you may find a way that you really like to roleplay, and you may find you really like talking in character and really immersing yourself in that. And it can be a lot of fun. And it can be fun no matter how you play. But for people who really love getting into character, that can be a really, really fantastic experience. Like it feels unlike anything else. Let's see. Make sure to tell other players and the GM about your character's background. Anything that's important, that is. Don't keep everything a secret, is really what I mean. If you are more concerned about the game moving people around on the board aspect more than the playing character part, don't detract from everybody else, and instead be there for them, to act as a sounding board, to act as another character in the game. Even if you don't care about what your character's background is, somebody else will care about their character. Pay attention to your character's stats and how that might affect how you play your character or describe your character or represent your character in game? What does your 4 intelligence mean? What does your 18 charisma mean? Just have some ideas, and maybe not every stat you need to really worry about, right? Maybe your 16 strength is just, hey, I'm strong. It doesn't really matter. But my 8 dexterity is I drop things all the time. Don't slow things down. Keep everything moving. Know your character. Know what you can do. Know what actions are possible. If you don't know what to do or don't have an idea, ask somebody. That's the easiest thing to do. When it comes to your turn, be ready to go. And lastly, look into improv and do some research on it, and especially the yes and, because there are variations on that they get into when people are a little more advanced in improv stuff. But those are my top tips for new role players. This hobby can be a lot of fun, and it especially can be a lot of fun if all you have to do is show up to the table and play the game, and you don't have to worry about anything else the rest of the week. You can relax, and then, oh, hey, it's Sunday night. I get to play D&D with my friends, or play whatever, Ars Magica, or anything else. I get to play with my friends, and all I need to do is remember to bring my dice, my pencils, my character, and I'm set. And I know who my character is because it's all in my head. I just need the stats. It's so much fun, and you will get so much more out of it if you are just willing to show up and contribute and show up and absorb. There you go. That's the 2 things in a nutshell. So those are my tips. I hope they're useful. If you have questions, please do let me know. I always include my email address in the description below. I also have the comments section available, so if people want to leave me questions there, I will absolutely respond. I'm sure other people will respond as well. And yeah, that's about it. And so now, as I say, stand by for adventure, because you're ready to go. Have a good time.